late. We had some technical issues with installations and what is happening with Hangouts on air or YouTube live chat. I think how it's called these days. Uh, Now, hopefully, we're okay. And let me introduce myself and my friend on the other part of the world. I'm Stanislav Grafski, Moscow, Russia located and dealing lawyer, entrepreneur, and business consultant. My major focus is on market entry and business in Russia expansion support, professional support to international players who consider expanding on this market or just selling into the market or dealing with Russian contractors or whatever. And I'm with Tate Ulsaker, who is in New Zealand, Native American, currently living, working in New Zealand.
Yes, hi, this is Tate. I'm glad to be here, and I've just tried to put this link onto Facebook, so I've got a huge audience there, and if it works out, we should be getting some people joining us soon. So yeah, I think the common thing between Stan and I is that we both have business operations in Russia. For myself, it's been going 20 years, and for Stan, it's been going 30 years. For myself, it's desk research primarily. For Stan, it's walking people from A to Z, foreign investors who are interested in partnerships, development, anything you want to do in Russia. Stan will make sure that there's a plan implemented that suits your needs. So he's specialized in that. He's a lawyer and he's a businessman. My background is a bit different. We do desk research, and we have a place there on Tverskaya, in the Central Telegraph building, just 100 meters or 200 meters from Red Square, very close to Red Square. We have endured sanctions, and we have come out of sanctions, and we're starting to finally do better. And the message I think that Stan and I have been trumpeting over and over is the same. I mean, the sanctions are a huge opportunity, as other problems in Russia that have happened in the past with the devaluation and turmoil related to economic instability, especially after the Soviet collapse and after the Yeltsin economy. There have been huge opportunities at both of those instances, and this is no different, Stan, no different at all. This is exactly the same level of opportunity, if not more so, because all these reasons for sanctions are obviously fraudulent. That's the first thing. The other thing is Russia has overcome them and is the most sufficient country, self-sufficient country on the planet now. And Russia is the richest country and the biggest country. You can't ignore Russia, and no industry giant or a market leader wants to ignore Russia, much less the traders who can benefit quite a lot. So if you have questions, if you're online now, and if you want to ask some questions, no question is too silly or too heavy. You ask whatever you want to. It doesn't mean we'll know the answer, but we'll give it a shot. So Stan, thanks for introducing me. I'm going to be quiet now and let you go. I know you've prepared for this, and I'm actually the guest, so I should actually shut my mouth a lot more. Thanks for inviting me, Stan. I'll just be on hand to support. Thank you.
Thank you, Tate. Actually, I'm very much appreciated for your participation, because realistically, the topics we are to briefly cover, I hope briefly, it's easier said than done. Realistically, better to be discussed with from different angles, and your values definitely, and you're absolutely rare to find experience of self-made man, or at least, entrepreneur who set up his very successful business, and now you can. I understand that. I saw your reference letters in your offers. I understand that it's dozens, if not hundreds, of Forbes 500 companies are your clients, at least those who been or are in Russia. So your experience and the word of wisdom would be very, very valuable to the listeners, I believe. So I actually identify just 3-4 topics which I think, in my opinion, might be interesting or indicative for this market with what happened in the last week or a little bit longer than a week, maybe 2. But the impact on the developments, in particular under the angle of implications for international players or market entrants, I think medium to long term effective. And the first one, I think, is definitely a cabinet's decision to put the deadline on, and actually with personal involvement on Mr. Putin as a president, putting deadlines on finalizing the government program of so-called digital economy. Sometimes I call it Putin's mantra these days. Why I get to return to this topic in the last few discussions all the time, it's very simple. I think it's a gold mine for international existing market players, as well as those who might consider this market but never thought about it. Basically, what happened in the last nearly 2 months, starting from the beginning of June, if I'm not mistaken, Putin and the government started articulating the idea of digital economy. And by now, it is decided that by the 30th of July, the first draft of complete government program on digital economy concept or development supposed to be finalized, which means, and Putin actually emphasized it a number of times, he considered digital economy approach as a cornerstone for the development of this country, and that means a lot realistically, money-wise, if you like, or for those who consider any market opportunities under the practical angle only, me too, for example. The government definitely identified that it is just a top priority for the country. It is a matter of not just only strategic development, but national security, and in light of the most recent threats we witnessed all across the world, including in this country. Quite a number of Russian major banks were seriously attacked recently, not with huge losses, fortunately, so far. Digital economy, realistically, in simple words, means that the government will support the development, applications and development of most promising technologies, know-hows, and their application in all walks of life in this country. By now, for example, Moscow government is considered to be most digitalized in the world, number one, in terms of live communication and its transparency to the entire world between Moscow government bureaucrats or officers and common people, which is really impressive. But it's just one part of the issue. These days, the country and the entire economy is pretty much welcome to new technologies or developments which are not yet present on the market. To me, it's kind of a second way of international technologies input into this country. The first one we witnessed approximately 90 to 100 years ago, and the most famous guy who made a fortune, just a fortune out of it, is an American entrepreneur, Mr. Hammer. He built Hammer Center, or International Trade Center in Moscow, some 40 years ago, all right, in a walking distance from the Parliament building. That time he was supplying tractors, excavators, machineries, technologies from all around the world, while the rest of the world were ignoring this country after the communist revolution. And he made, in today's terms, billions and billions of it. So I consider digital economy mantra by Putin is a multi-dimensional opportunity or field of opportunities available not only for major players, but even for smaller and medium-sized companies, for a very simple reason. We do have nearly 90 regions of federal objects, as we call it, something similar to American states. And needs all across the country are different. And we're not only talking about the government contracts. Government contracts are where the money on the surface is. And I'm pretty much sure, based on these first working documents from the government, the allocated funds, we first heard about $1.9 billion initially, then we heard about $3.4 billion program. Definitely it's just the peanuts, it's the very beginning. But smart market entrants could consider it, I would say, on the more strategic angle. It's not necessarily baiting for the government project contracts, which is still great realistically, but it's also plethora of opportunities to support those businesses that would meet digital economy mantra or meet certain requirements to projects to be supported. And I'm pretty much sure the tax incentives, additional incentives, and a lot of other lucrative issues will come into play very much soon. So basically, as I said, it is just the beginning, but nevertheless, those who are curious about the opportunities available, we definitely would recommend checking most recent Russian government website and the materials of St. Petersburg International Economic Forum 2017, which already identify bullet points or key areas where the applications of those expected new businesses will be. So that's basically about it. I can talk longer, but that's the key idea I would like to articulate. And my advice would be to anyone from any country in the world, or those who just considered the expanding internationally, thinking of just increasing the client base. Think about it. Even if you're not doing Apple computers, it doesn't really matter. If what you do or your product are involved in technologies or related with digital economy or whatever it is, again, it could be in quite a long list of industries like healthcare, public support, education, whatever it is. Watch the Russian market, and even if you've never been here or scared naturally or unnaturally about it, ask us, and we'll help you with even free advices how to do it in your particular situation. I always offer free consultation through my website, grafski.com, where you can book your time and we'll discuss or screen your particular situation and see how you can benefit or capitalize on today's Russian market opportunities. And no matter what mainstream media is saying about this country, I'm a big believer, not because I'm Russian, but I'm witnessing that every day as a lawyer, for example, and as a market player myself. It is very much stable country in terms of business development. So that's it from my side. Tate, you'd like to add something?
Well, contrasting what you just said about this being a very stable environment for business development, that does contrast sharply with how things used to be in the wild east of the 1990s in Russia. That's when I was there, so I'm more familiar with the 90s and up to mid 2000s. Since then, it's been a different country. Stan, you've told me that. We've got family members coming back and forth. Every year, it's changed tremendously. Russia is a completely different country, at least in the centers. I'm not sure what the news is in the regions. Perhaps the change has been less quick. But it's certainly interesting to watch the globalists put their power plays onto Russia in such a concerted way. And we see these sanctions coming on stream again and again. Now the latest round, they're wanting to expand them. You got to wonder what these people are, I mean, eventually, when will the business leaders say enough is enough, guys? There's no proof for any of the things that you're accusing of. There's been no trial. There's been the idea of sanctions for Russia regarding Ukraine is on its face so silly. The only thing that the Western media has going for it, and Western politicians, is repetitiveness. So they say the same things over and over. You just open an article and there it is. The same words, the key phrases in the headlines, the same in the videos and in the text of the articles, just talking about the downed airliner, Russia, angry at Russia, downed airliner, people upset, wanting to do something, this sort of thing. Well, you can say that about anything. You can say, for example, Switzerland is a very bad country because of Fukushima. We're very upset about Fukushima. I mean, it's absurd to say that, but believe it or not, if it's said across the media repeatedly for 4 or 5 years every day, then a great percentage of people will begin to associate the state of Switzerland with the event of Fukushima, even though it had nothing to do with it, the same way that Russia had no reason and no connection and no proof to anything related to an airliner. And the accusation of annexing Crimea, first of all, it was a vote with the most participation of any country that I can remember, maybe in world history. Really, it's 97% participation rate. You don't get that. It just doesn't happen. You had people going there who normally would never have voted for anything in their life. They just wanted to vote for this one thing. That's the sort of passion that that country had. Why? Because their brothers and sisters just across the bridge there in the eastern Ukraine, their brothers and sisters who were also in the same country were dying. Were being attacked by Kiev, which is a U.S.-controlled puppet state, which is, again, hypocrisy doesn't even justify the word. How do you accuse someone of taking over a country when you've taken over that country? So now the sanctions are coming on stream, and Russia has used the sanctions to become more independent, and all of the companies that have broken ranks and increasingly gotten involved with Russia against these stated reasons to have sanctions, they're only benefiting because Russia has so much needs and it has so much wealth. Needs plus wealth. I mean, it doesn't take math. I went to I majored in economics, Stan, but I didn't learn anything. But I did learn that when you have a big demand and when there's a lot of needs, and when you can supply some of those needs, then it's very attractive to be there and get involved. I mean, even an economics major can figure that out. So we had some people coming and going, Stan, and watching us. Probably the forum that we have here may not be conducive to asking questions, but we'll figure it out. If anyone is watching now, you know, you're welcome just to type in your question. We'll probably just stop our long monologues and answer your questions just as you fill them out, because it really eventually it's gonna come down to this engagement. You know, we're not gonna make any traction with positive things in the world if we're not engaging the world. And I think live video is a fantastic way to do that. So if you ask your questions, be assured there's no question too silly. There's no question too serious. There's no question that we're afraid to address. You can say anything you want to. Obviously, if you're just trolling, we may not read it out. But aside from that 1% chance, 99% of you ask a question, anything that comes to your head, we're going to address it. We're going to talk to it, and we're going to do our best to answer it in a way that makes sense based on how you ask the question, however it is that you want to know. Stan is in Moscow now. I'm in New Zealand now. We're communicating on Google Hangouts, which is appearing also on YouTube. I've broadcast on my Facebook and on my LinkedIn that I'm here. So I see some people watching. If anyone wants to ask a question, just go ahead. But I don't know what else there is to bring up, Stan. You had a lot of articles there. I think the main thing I wanted to really talk about this week was expansion of the absurd sanctions. I just have to shake my head and wonder what these guys are up to. Do they think it's, I mean, if it doesn't work the first time, if it doesn't work the second time, and when are they going to stop? I mean, all these efforts are only pushing BRICS together. They're only pushing all of the alternative. The world is tired of the wars. The world is tired of U.S. dominating all aspects of every election and then telling Russia that they're dominating the aspects of of their election. The world is tired of the U.S. bombing and getting involved in criminal activities, that crimes against humanity, actually, and then telling Russia they can't accept a part of a country because they voted 97% that they wanted to be part of Russia. I mean, why not use that as a shining example for how a country should take over or annex a country, if you want to put it that way? Let's say Russia took over Crimea. Okay, they did so without firing a single bullet and without a single person dying, even without the threat of a single bullet or someone dying. Now imagine that. Is that a crime? I don't know. You're a lawyer, Stan. Is that a crime?
You know, it's interesting when you hear those accusations of blaming statements. It was kind of a lot of irony in the Russian blogging sphere when that happened in February of 2014, when the entire peninsula voted, and the vast majority of those who came for voting, I think it's over, well, definitely vast majority of those, except of some little percentage of, I think, native Tatars or whatever, voted for reunification with Russia. But the irony was that Crimean said, and that was quite a lot of articulations, at least in Russian media, saying, well, you know, Russia might be politically lost with Serbia and Yugoslavia in the 90s when Russia tried to support Yugoslavia. Unfortunately, it didn't work well. And Albania case actually made a precedent for so-called legal ways of breaking the countries into pieces. And so now it is a law at the very top, at the UN level. Realistically, referendum or voting in Crimea 100% comply with what happened and what is approved as an international law. So some bloggers was teasing or you know, just irony, writing some irony. Now Putin just punched back for Yugoslavia, because Serbs and Russians, you know, historically very close. But even apart of that, since it is a law, it is not even discussion. But you know, I have a very famous, he's quite elderly guy, I don't want to name his name. Every American knows him. He's a media guy who set up an ABC in the 60s, television broadcasting on air. And when it happened, and we had a chat, he's extremely smart and very, very wise guy. The first thing came to his mind, he said, well, what they're talking about, if majority of people living there are native Russians, it's not even discussion. And that to me was, well, and I was a lawyer, I was thinking, no, we need to move some proof. He said, well, no proof. They are Russians. That's it. And historically, they're part of Russia. So what we're talking about, we're talking about just technical issues. So a part of Crimea, you know, I understand it's a rather politically driven stories. And the second topic I'd like to touch upon, which just came to it, it's very indicative what is happening with the next wave of anti-Russian sanctions in the American Senate. And it will be very interesting what the end of the story will be, but it's quite an indicative that quite a list of US majors in energy and technologies now Putin or lobbying for stopping the second wave of sanctions, because businesses as reasonable people, driven by reasonable people, understand what they might lose out of these political games. And realistically, political games is one story, but you cannot put if not at least even a part of your economy on stake just because of political gains and ambitions. And big businesses, as far as I understand, are pretty much aware what they would lose if they don't participate in this economy development. Even at the very first sight, look at the priority development topics or most lucrative industries in this country for the years or decades to come. Arctics, development of Arctics. Look at it, the 30% of national reserves of the earth is located there, and it is Russia controlled. You guys, you want to participate in it, and particularly bringing your technologies for Arctic development, you know, or you leave it for Russians and the rest of the world. China, by the way, is much, much smarter. They participate in every opportunity across the world, and look at how they develop those opportunities related, for example, with Arctic Development Program. They involved in actually big shareholders in Yamal LNG, Now they involved in getting involved in a northern sea route. Northern sea route is just another transportation vein, if you like, for sending, for example, Chinese-made goods to both through the Russian north or nearby Russian north areas, which is also a huge consumer base, but also to Europe. It's one story, but apart of that, you know, just to keep it focused, I hope, and we'll see what happens, that the second wave of these anti-Russian sanctions will finally stop at where they are, because realistically, the first 3 years of so-called sanctions, well, Russia had been living under sanctions for hundreds of years, let's be honest. As a Russian imperial Tsar or king, Alexander III, said in the late 19th century, when talking about the allies and how many times allies of this country betrayed this country. He said, this country has only one, maybe it sounds a bit straightforward, but it seems like, at least for the time being, only two allies, army and navy. And the rest we're supposed to be self-sustainable. And in this globalized world, definitely it's probably not that not that true anymore. But in a reality, the first 3 years of Western sanctions proved that the Russian economy, after the quite a painful hit, survived, picked up, and now grow. And those international business players who would like to bite out of this pie, definitely very much welcome. And the government propose day by day new measures to stimulate international players. And we can talk about it. Actually, I can talk about it with facts and mechanism for hours, but it's obvious. So we'll see what happens with the sanctions. If businesses in the United States, at least majors, can actually influence those reasonably thinking brains at the top.
Stan, it's always a pleasure to get your review, because your depth of understanding goes back, as many Russians do, understand how things have changed through the eras, and indeed before you were born. A lot of Westerners don't understand that at all, and I have to admit, I wish I understood a lot more than I do. Russia was a global power for 100 or 200 years, going back to even the birth of the United States. In fact, Russia was involved with helping the United States gain independence from Great Britain. And so this is a royal war going back. This is a long war. It's an economic war, probably first of all. And now the game is apparently the globalists, as I call them, the Western big money private bankers and perhaps royalty connected families are after the world. And they reckon that now is the time to push Russia aside. But they've miscalculated. And the thing is, now they're doubling down, in my view. With a weak hand, you don't double down. With a weak hand, you take your losses, you admit you're wrong, you shake hands, and you walk off and take your losses and take your lesson. But what these guys are doing with their weak hand is they're doubling down, and they're trying to go for broke. And I don't know, Stan, they're such plutocrats. They're so far away from reality. I don't even know if they know what they're doing anymore. But it is nice to know that there are people like you out there who can pull people who are interested in investments right through the channel. If someone has a question, go to Stan. If someone wants to meet someone in an industry, develop a proposal, find some business partners, or find some marketing targets, go to Stan. Stan's specialty is doing everything from hand-holding to specific targeted actions. And when I say hand-holding, I'm talking about maybe someone who's not experienced with international trade. They want to get into the Russian market, but they don't know much. Stan will walk you through it. He's been around for a long time. He's got a reputation. He's everywhere. He's on his name is everywhere. You can look him up. Stan Grafski, his name is right down there. Look him up. His reputation is important to him. He's not going to do what you fear he's going to do, to take advantage of you financially. He's wanting his partners to win. So jump on the opportunity. At the very least, if you're interested, you can ask some questions, get involved, and probably orient yourself a little bit better on what sort of things Stan can do, and then decide, is that a channel I want to jump down or not? But the opportunities are endless. It's harder to try to find the opportunity to talk about than it is to actually talk about one. If you pick one, you just throw a dart on the encyclopedia of Russian key industries and let the dart land, then you can start talking about something. The hard thing is to actually choose one. So we're talking about Arctics. Of course it's huge. We could talk about, like last time we talked about a lot of things are happening in technology right now. And again, it's by necessity. Russia's having to make a go of it. And the partners that Russia has so far are nearby neighbors with China. China's got a different take on this than the West, at least with Western leaders. Let's be clear. There's Western leadership, there's Western industry, and there's general Western population. All three are absolutely different mentalities, different peoples, absolutely 100% different points of analysis. China leadership is smart. They have a history, they have neighbors, they have a market, they're big exporters, they have big needs for natural resources, they're right next to Russia. It makes perfect sense. Now the US thinks, well, China should go with us, we're their biggest buyers. Well, China knows that's not going to last forever. You guys have the petrodollar, and China also knows that what kind of friends the United States is. What friends were they to Iraq? They had a partnership there for a while. What kind of friends has the United States been to Germany? Look at all the military bases there. To Japan, look at all the military bases there. So the extortion risk from partnership with America is very real, and everyone knows about it. Every country knows about it. The meddling with elections, as Putin rightly pointed out to Megyn Kelly when she was talking about meddling with elections in the United States, he said, where's the proof? Probably about 1,000 times so far to different people. But what it comes back around to again is that the United States is in fact meddling with every country, and not just elections, with actual staffing of governments and with dropping bombs on the heads of civilians. and with the forcing trade and sanctions on countries that have no other reason other than globalist agenda. China sees that. China, it's already known. It's known to Chinese leadership. It's known to Chinese population and to Chinese industry. I'm sure of it. They have a more of awareness than the general public in the United States. Now, America has got a lot of aware people, and they're online, and I appreciate them. They're fantastic resources, a lot of them. But the general population, and everyone's got the same complaint, the general population in America is clueless. American industry, on the other hand, is different. American industry understands, look at Caterpillar. Caterpillar's big in Russia. When I was at a meeting in St. Petersburg, Stan, and it was the Caterpillar that was saying, we need industry we need infrastructure. We need electrical infrastructure in many areas of Siberia. And they started that discussion in the Yeltsin era when no one would listen to them. Now, of course, they have people listening to them, and things are different, and things are progressing there. But this is the kind of thing that should be happening and is happening and should be happening more of. Sensible decisions about practical future projections. What do I want from my company, from my family, from my industry, from my business? Do I want a long-term relationship with a country that has a lot of needs and a lot of abilities to pay and is undervalued? Well, there's only one biggest country in the world who is also in that category, and that's Russia. And someone like Stan can walk you through it. So I think that's really all I had to say for this round. Thanks a lot, Stan, for inviting me. And I'm sorry I took so much time this time. I guess sometimes I have a lot to say, and it's more words than I need to say it.
No problem. Thank you. Thank you. I would also like to to quickly stop by two other not business developments, but definitely notable issues or occurrences which happened last week and the week before. First is quite a notable deal between Yandex Taxi, which is Russia, and Uber. I think it's called Uber in correct English.
Uber.
Uber. Okay. And why it's worth considering, or it's worth even talking about, well, M&A deals or new business. Well, first of all, because of the size of the business, the deal is at 3.7 billion, where Yandex controls nearly 60% of the deal, and the rest controlled by Uber, and 4% by the employees. There are quite a number of comments in the specialized press and media about the deal. But again, my view on it is what I feel about it. It's probably too early to discuss it yet. Definitely, it's worth keeping the eyes closed. Why? On this deal. The deal and the venture is supposed to expand into other Eurasian Economic Union countries. So definitely the initial success in this country will be replicated or likely to be replicated there. But more than that, from inquiries I received from international consulting intermediaries who ask for on-the-ground advice on behalf of their clients, and I received them at least 3 in the last 2 days. It is all about this deal, which is very interesting. It's indicative. Obviously, this kind of projects might be very much interesting as a litmus for coming investors. So the rest remains to be seen. Nothing to add. You know, I'm just a user of Yandex Taxi and Uber. I know it's quite convenient. It's very fast, and we'll see how it works out. Realistically, supposed to be interesting now. And as the follow-up to the sanctions topic, one of the victims of those anti-Russian sanctions and the respective regulations appears to become Siemens from Germany. Reuters and I think Bloomberg reported that 4 power engines produced by Siemens was illegally sent to Crimea, where they are to be used by I don't know whom. It's not even about the details who broke the law. Realistically, these days Siemens supposed to be in very defensive position, and they look into the case who broke those regulations. more interesting topic is, and that's what is widely discussed by economists and analysts, how Siemens will balance on one hand between regulations implemented by EU as a part of anti-Russian sanctions on one hand, and it was no fault that Siemens production appeared in the area which is prohibited by EU. On the other hand, analysts, maybe a little bit radical analysts, saying, well, if these guys don't behave on this country, in this country, perhaps they need to leave it. I'm definitely against those that approach, and I believe, you know, a company with such of this size and impact on to this country and its economy, we have some kind of 100 years of Siemens being represented in this country. It's not worth any quick, you know, hot had decisions. But what is more important is how those politics-driven measures like anti-Russian sanctions try to affect the common sense, common business sense of major players. And I understand if there would be, in the first place, wouldn't be EU sanctions against Russia regarding the Ukrainian, Crimean limits for the companies to supply the products to, I believe Siemens would have much more orders from there, because realistically, it's one of the areas of Russia which needs, you know, Western, or not necessarily Western, technologies and developments more than the rest of the country, because under the last 25 years, or a little bit more than that, it was officially, well, it was a part of Ukraine for another stupid reason. But nevertheless, and that's, we see that Crimea came out of this partnership seriously destroyed economically. So in this case, definitely Western suppliers, even the proven suppliers, lose quite a lot of pie on this table of money, leaving money on the table. We pretty much, it took us quite long for our discussions, and I just wonder if there is anyone to send us a question, if someone is interested to ask any specific questions.
I remember, Stan, I don't see I see some viewers coming and going, but I don't see any questions. Perhaps we'll switch up our format a little bit in the future. But one thing that came to mind about the taxi situation in Russia, everyone who's been to Russia knows there was no reason at the time I was there to have a car. No reason at all. All I had to do is walk out at the street and hold out my hand.
Believe me, now it's even more than these days. The issue is more or hotter than before, because jams, much more jams than before. Realistically, tube or metro works quite well all the time, and very cheap, really, well, relatively cheap. But most importantly, jams. Why do you need a car when you can easily pick up the phone, go, you know, in Moscow downtown for under $10, approximately, maybe a little bit more than that, depending on the time and distance, and that's it. But if you need to pay the parking places these days, you can easily, in particular in downtown, it's really tough. And these take into account the software they use, Yandex software. That's the biggest competitive technical advantage of Yandex Taxi, that you press the button and the nearest Yandex Taxi comes to you. Normally it takes 1-2 minutes, the longest. So definitely it's cheaper not to have a car in Moscow these days.
Mm. And then regarding that Siemens thing, the only comment I had was, I agree with you. I think just watching how that happens politically will be very interesting, because in the normal business sense, you just determine who did right, who did wrong, and make corrections. Whether there's a fine involved or not, it's immaterial. The little things like that get worked through. It's not even an issue, and the business keeps going one way or the other. And just by taking into account the lessons learned from that. But the political fallout is the bigger issue. And that's what bothers me, I think, the most, to see this world gamed by criminals that kill innocent people by the millions and steal trillions of dollars in oil. That bothers me. So sometimes my passions come out. I've learned a little bit to restrain them and to talk sensibly. Certainly for a head of state like Putin, he's much more reserved than I am, and probably feels much more passionately than I do, as he is actually representing millions of his own people. And very well, by the way. Probably he's the only head of state that does as well as, he's probably the best head of state. And certainly he's representing his people better than any head of state that we have, unfortunately. We'd like to see one. I'd like to see one in the West that represents the actual people rather than globalist interests. So I'm not pro Putin as a person. I'm not worshiping him. If he changes tomorrow, my opinion changes tomorrow. That's it. But just watching him, he's representing his people very well. And until now, I can't imagine a better head of state. So that's just a fact. And a lot of people agree with me. Some people get into this worship of the personality cult. I try not to do that. But with Mr. Putin, you just have to be in awe as to how he handles all these ridiculous accusations and game playing to force him in the corner. And he's pulled his country forward with great help of, I'm sure, a lot of people behind the scenes. Russia is united behind the scenes, which is what happens. If you put the pressure on to a people, they get united. And if Iraq would have had nukes, they probably would have been more united. They probably would have acted. If Syria had nukes, they probably would have acted. If Libya had nukes, they probably would have acted. The fact that Russia has nukes and the ability to use them, and a unified population, it's only guarantees additional political stability. So we hope that stability will remain and business will go up. And this whole globalist idea to game Russia into the corner and steal their resources, as they've done in so many countries, it's just not going to work feasibly. It just can't work. It's a stupid idea. The best thing that could happen from an economic point of view is, well, you can't really have one. There's nothing. There's only failure or nuclear war. There's no other option for the West. What can they get? Probably they can pinch some money on setting up the police state a little bit more by bringing fear in a little bit stronger. Maybe they can get a few more wars around Russia going, like, Yemen is in the latest one, and that's a U.S. war again. It's fought with U.S. weapons and U.S. allies fighting it, U.S. allies paying money for it. Come on, it's a U.S. war again. It's just sad, and it does make me angry. But we're here to talk about business, and a business is, oddly enough, a solution. It is a solution. Cooperation. Forget you politicians. We're going to cooperate. Forget all these discussions about cornering Russia and taking over the world. I'm going to make money with some guys that are wrongly accused, and I'm going to get Stan to help me. That sounds like a better idea to me.
Yeah, thank you, Tate. Well, if we excuse me, if we don't have any questions, perhaps we can finish it up. I do have a number of frequently asked questions when I have keep free initial consultations with inquiries or those who consider this market. But perhaps it took us over an hour by now, or nearly an hour. We can devote to it sometime next session or something like that.
Yeah, that sounds good. I've taken a look at your questions. They're really good, and we can review them next time or anytime. Probably people will bring them up because they're very common.
Yeah. So if you watch this this session in the recording, please leave your comments. We would very much appreciate it for that, realistically, because the feedback, that's what is most important out of this video casts for everyone is involved. But this feedback realistically proves what might be of interest. I know many people what they articulate to me. We consider expanding internationally, but since we've never been in this country, it scares me in the first place. Not to mention, mainstream media, the entire PR hype and image of the country. But in general, we don't even know. Well, so the first issue which comes to mind, either scared or the entire market is misrepresented. And once you start talking on that, the very next question is, we don't know if we can sell into this market and how. And why I mentioned that I just had an inquiry this week from a Asian apparel company which considers selling their stuff into this market, and they do very much logical things. They don't have a rep office here. They don't have any representatives or employees or something like that, like in any other countries they supply to. But even without talking to me, they checked the ground and they said, well, we identify at least one e-shop chain, and the negotiations with that, keeping in mind that they could insure the risks through the trade credit insurance. And that's what vast majority of my initial inquiries never even thought about. But in this country, don't forget, it's not a wild desert. All major insurance players are all in place, and you can always consider even this way, where you would be supported by not just insurance as a compensation, but most importantly, knowing one of the ways to know your buyer better, distributor, something like that. So what I'm trying to say is that there are a lot of ways to sell or cooperate in this market, and probably it's worth devoting the entire session on models of entering or selling into this market, and I would be happy to talk on it in more detail with samples, with business cases, how it's done, how long it took, how much it costed, just to be very much straight to the ground. So what do you think, Tate?
Thank you, Stan, for the opportunity to be here again. I look forward to developing this more, and I think viewer involvement like you, I think that's really going to be the key. Engagement.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you everyone who watches us now or afterwards in the recording. Send us feedback. If you like it, give us your thumbs up. If you don't, give us thumbs down. Just give us some feedback. That's what we're really looking for, and I hope to see you soon then. Thank you very much indeed. Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.